Hey everyone and welcome. Today we're diving into a topic that's, well, it's really going to make you look at history a whole new way. We're going to be talking about women, animals, and how civilization actually began. Yeah, we're going to be checking out this book, Cyborgs vs. the Earth Goddess. It's by Dr. Moses Seenarine, and let me tell you, this book, it really flips the script on how we think about the development of human societies.
Okay, so Cyborgs vs. the Earth Goddess, huh? That it's definitely grabbing my attention, but I gotta be honest, I'm a little lost already.
So the main thing Dr. Seenarine's arguing is that when we domesticated animals, it totally reshaped human societies. And one of the biggest changes, we shifted away from these female-centric societies, what he calls gynocentric societies, and well, we ended up with the more patriarchal structures we see a lot of today.
Gynocentric societies. Okay, gotta be honest, not ring any bells. Can you, give me a picture of what those look like?
Okay, so imagine a society that's all about balance, right? Cooperation, where instead of dominance, leadership is all about consensus, working together, harmony, that kind of thing. Right. Dr. Seenarine, he points to the Musuo people as a real-life example of this.
The Musuo people.
Yeah, they're this matrilineal society over in southwestern China. Women there, they've got serious social and economic power. Huh. But it's not about one gender being the boss. It's more about everyone working together, making decisions as a community.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it, but I still have a ton of questions. For starters, how does domestication fit into all of this?
All right, so this is where it gets really cool. Dr. Seenarine, he breaks down human history into 7 different phases of domestication. And get this, he says that the first few of these phases, things like domesticating fire, the very beginnings of agriculture, those were driven by women.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying women were the original farmers? That's not what I learned in school.
Oh, no, right. It kind of makes you rethink things. Think about it. In a lot of early societies, women were the gatherers, the ones who went out and found the food, the plants, that kind of thing. So they're the ones who really knew the land, how it worked. Oh. Dr. Seenarine suggesting that this knowledge, it's what laid the foundation for, the very first types of agriculture.
Yeah. When you put it that way, it does make a lot of sense. So if you've got these early societies, these gynocentric ones, and they're already farming, what does that mean for that whole man the hunter idea? The one they always teach us about.
Yeah, Dr. Seenarine he kind of tears that idea apart. He says this image we have, this caveman image of early humans just chasing down giant animals all the time. It's just not accurate. Hunting existed, sure, but it wasn't the only way people survived.
So instead of the Flintstones, it's more like what? Prehistoric gardeners?
You got it. They were managing the land,
Yeah.
using things like fire farming, which is where they'd use controlled burns to clear land, help new stuff grow. That way they could grow food sustainably.
Wow, okay. That's pretty amazing. So how do we go from societies where women are the leaders, the ones coming up with new ideas, to everything that came after?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And that's where the later phases of domestication, specifically the 6th and 7th phases, those are the ones that kind of changed everything, according to Dr. Seenarine.
Okay, you've got to tell me more. What were these 6th and 7th domestications? How'd they change things so much?
Okay, so the 6th domestication, this was a big one. It was the enslavement of, ruminant animals. Cows, sheep, goats, that kind of thing. Animals that weren't just for food, but also for, labor, trade, all that.
So we're talking about the shift from mostly eating plants to an economy that's more about animals.
Exactly. And when that happened, everything about who had power changed too. Suddenly, being physically strong, being able to control these big animals, that became the most important thing. And historically speaking, that usually meant
men. That's when men started to take over.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about brute force. When men started controlling these valuable resources, they started controlling the food supply, the goods, everything.
So it's not even just about who's doing the farming. It's about who's calling the shots, right? Who controls all the resources.
You got it. And Dr. Seenarine says that this control, it went way beyond just the economy. It started to shape our social structures, our beliefs, even our spirituality.
Okay, I am hooked. We're gonna have to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we gotta talk about that 7th domestication. And how does this all connect to the whole cyborg idea? I need to know. All right, we're back. And before the break, we were talking about this 7th domestication. You said it was kind of unsettling. What did Dr. Seenarine mean by that?
Well, the 7th domestication, at least according to Dr. Seenarine, is, it's the domestication of women.
Whoa, okay. That's a pretty big statement. What does he mean by that?
He's saying that, like, as these patriarchal structures became, more and more powerful, women's roles, they got more and more controlled, more limited. Their opportunities, their freedom, even just their ability to, like, move around, it all kind of got smaller and smaller, almost like what we did with domesticated animals.
So it's like once men had control over animals, over resources, they kind of, I don't know, use that same way of thinking in their relationships with women.
That's exactly what he's arguing. He's drawing the direct line between controlling nature, controlling animals, and controlling women. And he's saying they're all part of this, like, this cyborg mentality.
Okay, let's talk more about that, this cyborg idea. How does that fit into all of this?
So for Dr. Seenarine, the cyborg, it represents this disconnect, right? This disconnect from the natural world that happened when humans decided they were going to dominate, control everything. It's like we started thinking we're separate from nature, like we're better than it, instead of being a part of it.
So you're saying, like, by trying to make our lives better, easier, safer, we kind of accidentally create this system where everything's about domination.
Exactly. And he says that mindset, it's had some really bad consequences for the planet, for people, for all of us.
Okay, that makes sense. But, like, if this shift's been happening for thousands of years, is there any hope for us to change? Can we get rid of this cyborg programming, so to speak?
Dr. Seenarine, he thinks we can. But he says we need a totally different way of thinking. He says we can learn a lot from those early gynocentric societies, the ones we were talking about before, the ones that were all about balance, working together, and respecting the natural world.
So it's not about, like, ditching technology or anything. It's more like just being smarter about it, about our relationship with it.
Exactly. He's saying we need to be more mindful, more sustainable. We need to remember that everything's connected. And he thinks women, because they've always been so connected to the earth, they understand sustainability. They have a super important role to play in all of this.
Okay, that's pretty empowering. But how do we even start to make that kind of change? Where do we even begin?
Dr. Seenarine, he says we start with ourselves. We got to look at our own biases, the ways we've, like, internalized this cyborg way of thinking. Do we think we're separate from nature or part of it? Do we want to dominate and control or collaborate, try to be in harmony?
Those are some deep questions. But let's say we can change our own thinking. What about all the big stuff? Like all the systems that are built on oppression and control. How do we even begin to deal with that?
That's where collective action comes in. Dr. Seenarine, he really believes in the power of, social movements to create real, lasting change.
So it's not enough to just have this kind of, like, individual awakening. We have to actually come together and, like, challenge these systems, right? The ones that keep these harmful patterns going.
Yes, exactly. He says that understanding how all these issues are connected, from the environment to social justice, that's how we create a world that's more fair, more sustainable.
So it's not just about women's rights or animal rights or even just being environmentally friendly. It's about realizing that they're all connected, that they're all part of this bigger problem.
Yes. He's saying that real progress, it means changing our values. It means moving away from this need to dominate and control and moving towards something that's more collaborative, more compassionate.
Yeah, I can get behind that. It seems like so much of history, especially how we treat the earth and each other, it's all about this idea of, like, conquering, bending the world to our will. What if we tried learning from nature instead of overpowering it? What if we actually tried working together instead of competing all the time?
Those are the questions that Dr. Seenarine wants us to ask. He thinks that by looking at our history, by really understanding how we got to this place, how we developed these patterns of domination, that's how we can start to create a different future.
It's like that saying, those who can't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. But in this case, it's more like we need to remember the past so we can break free from it, so we can build something better.
Exactly. And he's not just talking about these big, huge gestures. He thinks change starts with every single one of us, with the choices we make every day.
So what can we do? What are some things that, people listening can do to start changing this cyborg mentality? How can we start building a world that's more balanced, more harmonious?
He says we can start with really simple stuff, like just being more aware what we buy, how much we buy. Do we really need the latest gadget, the newest clothes? Or can we be more mindful? Make choices that are better for the planet, better for the people making the stuff we buy.
It's like that whole thing with fast fashion, right?
Right.
Exploiting workers, destroying the environment just to make all these clothes. It's all connected.
It is. And it's not about feeling guilty or trying to be perfect. It's just about, like, being aware, making a conscious choice. Can we, like, mend our clothes instead of throwing them out? Can we buy food that's grown locally? Stuff like that. These little things, if everyone does them, they can really make a difference.
Okay, but besides our own choices, what else can we do?
We can support organizations that are, like, out there doing the work, groups that are protecting the environment, fighting for social justice, challenging these systems of oppression, giving them our time, our money, even just our voices. That can really help them make a difference.
So it's about putting our money where our mouth is, or our time, our voices. It's about supporting the kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly. And it's about having those hard conversations, the ones that make people uncomfortable. We got to challenge the way things are, speak up when we see injustice, no matter what.
So it's like staying silent, that just lets everything keep happening, right? But even small acts of being brave, speaking up, that can have a ripple effect.
That's a great way to put it. It's about taking back our power as individuals and as a group, and using that power to create a world that's actually based on our values, a world that's balanced, harmonious, where everyone's respected.
That's an amazing vision, and I really think it's one that our listeners are going to think about long after they finish this episode. So if there's one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this whole conversation, this whole dive into Cyborgs vs. the Earth Goddess, what would it be?
Oh, that's easy. Read the book. I'll be honest. It's not always like a fun, easy read, but it really makes you think. It's inspiring. Dr. Seenarine doesn't give you all the answers, but he gives you a really powerful way of looking at the world, at our place in it.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of those books that makes you question everything, but in a good way. It might change how you see the world, maybe even inspire you to get out there and make it better.
And on that note, thank you so much for having me. It's been great, talking about all of this with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those questions, keep learning, and never stop trying to make a difference. So it's like staying silent, that just lets everything keep happening, right? But even small acts of being brave, speaking up, that can have a ripple effect.
That's a great way to put it. It's about taking back our power as individuals and as a group, and using that power to create a world that's actually based on our values, a world that's balanced, harmonious, where everyone's respected.
That's an amazing vision, and I really think it's one that our listeners are going to think about long after they finish this episode. So if there's one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this whole conversation, this whole dive into Cyborgs vs. the Earth Goddess, what would it be?
Oh, that's easy. Read the book. I'll be honest, it's not always like a fun, easy read, but it really makes you think, It's inspiring. Dr. Seenarine doesn't give you all the answers, but he gives you a really powerful way of looking at the world, at our place in it.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of those books that makes you question everything, but in a good way. It might change how you see the world, maybe even inspire you to get out there and make it better.
Absolutely. And on that note, thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking about all of this with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those questions, keep learning, and never stop trying to make a difference.